Steve, and I'm here with City Councilwoman Karen Goldner. We're talking a little bit about speed limits. You and Councilman Bender have been working on some things. I'll kind of let you take it away.
Sure. Well, Councilman Bender and I have been talking about whether to drop the speed limit, effectively the default speed limit in residential neighborhoods. So this wouldn't be your main streets, but just inside residential neighborhoods, from 30, which is what it is now, to 25. Right now we have 25 miles an hour in school cross zones, school areas, but nowhere else really. So we have been spending a lot of time going and talking with the area partnerships, our neighborhood area partnerships throughout the city. Also, we're going to be talking, well, I'm going to be talking with some police officers over this next few days, and obviously Councilman Bender is a police officer and talks with lots of police officers. We've gotten a lot of input so far from folks who've seen some of the different media coverage. I get a lot of emails or phone calls on the subject. It's interesting to hear people's perspectives. I mean, there are, I'd say about half of the people are strongly in favor and often have stories about people who drive too fast in their neighborhoods. What it comes down to is, and I've gotten reports of speeding actually since I started running for office. I mean, when I was campaigning door to door, people would complain about this. And when police go out and do enforcement, or even when we just do traffic studies, speed studies, what the police typically find is that folks are going in the 28 to 32, 33 mile an hour limit by and large, which is effectively not speeding. But still, the sense of unsafe feelings that people have remains. And so, people will say, oh my gosh, these people are driving 50 miles an hour down my street. Well, they're not. They're driving 30. That's the speed limit. And so the issue, the thing that I started to think about is, well, does that mean that 30 is too high? And many other communities in other Midwestern states have 25 as the speed limit in residential neighborhoods. That's really quite common. There have been some studies done in Wisconsin and Missouri and about the impact of reducing speed limits. One of the issues that's an issue for us to consider is that the cost of this would be maybe $300,000, because there's some neighborhoods that are posted 30, and those would have to be changed, obviously. But then also, because this is no longer the default speed limit, we would have to post it pretty much everywhere, and that's an expensive undertaking. And so, one of the concerns that a lot of people have said is, well, they don't think that it's worth $300,000, and that's certainly a valid point. Another way of looking at it is that it's $1 a person in Fort Wayne, or a little more, maybe $1.15 or something a person. So, but many people find that number to be really more than they can justify in their minds. There's also concern about enforcement. Part of this does get back to, however, the thought that, well, when the police come out, they don't really enforce because people still drive too fast. Well, of course they drive too fast because they're driving the speed limit, and the police can only enforce to the speed limit. So I think part of it is a lack of understanding in terms of really what it feels like to have somebody drive 30 miles an hour down your street. Because in many streets in town, most people don't drive the speed limit because it doesn't feel safe. I don't drive 30 miles an hour in my neighborhood, and it's not because I'm some overly cautious driver. It's because it just doesn't feel right. I've got cars parked on both sides of the street with kids playing in my neighborhood and so forth, and that's pretty common. But I've also then heard from people, in a Boyd Township, for instance, who, by God, I'm going to drive 30 miles an hour because it's my right, when neighbors complain to these people about driving too fast, because often it's the people who live in the neighborhood who are driving in the neighborhood. So anyway, so those are all the various issues. One suggestion that came up with the Northeast Area Partnership, which I thought was a fabulous idea, and it's something that we're really looking at very seriously, would be to allow neighborhoods to petition the city if they wanted it to be 25. Otherwise it would stay 30, but a couple of benefits of that. The first benefit is that we're not trying to do a one-size-fits-all thing, and so if you have a neighborhood where everybody wants to go 30 and where that makes sense, well, then it doesn't change anything for them. It would dramatically reduce cost, because we have a sign shop that makes signs and puts them out. And, we're paying those guys to do that right now. The $300,000 number comes from trying to do a lot of it in a relatively short period of time, and so you end up with overtime issues and a lot of materials costs that if you could just sort of do it a little at a time, it really would not add anywhere near that amount of cost. One of the concerns that I think could come up from this approach, though, is maybe a source of confusion for people. Although, again, you'd have signs posted, and right now we have school speed limits that are lower, so I'm not sure that that's a real strong argument. But the other is that if it's safer for people to drive 25 than to drive 30, then shouldn't that be true everywhere, and not just in a neighborhood where neighbors frankly care enough to take up a petition? And I think that's a legitimate point, actually. So anyway, so where we're at right now is we're still in the information gathering phase, and then at some point in the next couple of weeks, I think Councilman Bender and I will have a cup of coffee and decide whether and how we want to proceed with this, and then we'll move ahead or not. We'll see how that goes.
I know you touched on it just a little bit, but I think that my perception when I first came to Fort Wayne, and it pretty much holds true, especially with some of the media coverage the last year with ticket slowdowns and things like that, is that there really isn't much enforcement. And I guess from my standpoint, I think that would be a big part of this as well, because if you're going to change the signs, it doesn't do any good to... If you're not enforcing. If you're not going to enforce it, and that perception is there.
Yeah, I think that that is right. You know, part of it is that we really have, when you compare our per capita police force to other communities, very few police officers. Very few police officers. I mean, if the city of Fort Wayne won the lottery and we got several $1 million or something, I really would like to put that into more officers, especially Northeast, which is where the 2nd District is in part. If you have a bank robbery at Maple Crest in the Georgetown area, you got no other cops anywhere in the Northeast quadrant. I mean, it's really awful to say that, but it is largely true. And so we just don't have enough staffing power to be able to dedicate an officer to sit somewhere for 3 hours or something and write tickets. Now, we do some of that. I mean, that happens, but it doesn't happen as much as in my opinion, it should, and that's a manpower issue. Having said that, right now, the people who are driving too fast being defined by pedestrians, aren't speeding. So they're not going to get a ticket. So that's the thing you got to remember is right now, enforcement is relatively ineffective, and you might almost say a waste of time, because there aren't that many people driving 50 miles an hour through our neighborhoods. They're driving 30. Maybe they're driving 35, and because of inaccuracies in odometers and so forth, the police basically give you about 8 miles an hour over before they start to ticket. So if the speed limit's 30, you're really going in the high 30s potentially and getting away with it. That's not because the police are mad at anybody or doing their job or not doing their job. It's just if you're not speeding, you're not going to get a ticket. So I think it would make our enforcement efforts, frankly, more effective to have the speed limit reduced a little bit. But I agree. I mean, the enforcement piece has got to be a part of it.
Do you have your State of the Second scheduled?
I do. It will be Wednesday, February 3rd at 7 p.m. At the Sciote Barn upper level in Northside Park. And I'm getting the speech even kind of written. And last year I gave an actual speech, which is sort of boring. And so this year I'm going to do a presentation with some photographs and things that hopefully will be a little more interesting. And also talk about crime statistics. Crime is down citywide and in the 2nd District. And I think that there's some reasons for that we'll talk about. So some good news.
Good. Well, Karen, I think it's always fascinating to talk with you. So we appreciate your time.
Gosh, Stephen, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.